Hello, Gathering, and welcome to worship. My name's Yvi Martin. I'm the pastor at our Clayton site, and I welcome you. If you're joining us online, thanks for logging in. We're glad you're here for worship today. We're wrapping up what I think has been a really meaningful series for a lot of people on friendship. As adults, particularly in the thick of life, working, pursuing vocation, raising families, chasing our dreams, we find that our friendships often take a distant back seat to other more pressing things in our lives. I recently read an older article from The Atlantic that put it bluntly. If you think of all the things we have to do, we have to work, we have to take care of our kids or our parents, friends choose to do things for each other, so we can put them off. They fall through the cracks. I think each one of us, regardless of age or life stage, understands this in a really personal way. So as people of faith, should we think about friendships differently? What does our sacred story, the Bible, have to teach us about how to have friends and how to be friends in the real world? Last week, Matt worked through what to do when we hit bumps in the road with a friend. How are we equipped to handle conflict or navigate being at odds with a friend? And thinking through that this week reminded me of a really odd ritual I had with my very first BFF. I mentioned her a few weeks ago in a sermon, but she's getting a second shout out today. Jenny and I were next door neighbors and inseparable from the day my family moved into the neighborhood. We ruled the cul-de-sac on our bikes. We held the monopoly on the neighborhood lemonade production. We were the grand marshals of our very own 4th of July parade, which consisted of the two of us on decorated bikes and my sister pulling a wagon with a teddy bear in it. We antagonized her older brother. We paper-mache'd things we should not have paper-mache'd, and we spent thousands of hours in either backyard up to whatever whim or fancy had gotten into our heads that day. As you well know, that much time together only promises that conflict will come, and it did, of course. We'd find ourselves at odds about all sorts of things. But even as young as first or second graders, we knew that if we wanted to stick together, we'd have to figure it out. And so I honestly don't remember whose idea it was or when it happened for the first time, but we established a reconciliation ritual. Whenever we found ourselves at the point in our fight where we didn't know what to do next, one party, it didn't matter who, we both always held the right to do so, but one person would run and ring the bell. Now, the bell was not actually a bell. It was a wooden bead on a rope that was tied to our garage door. This was before we had an automatic garage door opener at our house, so my dad had tied up this rope within reach of all the children so that we could assist in the raising and the lowering of the garage door when necessary. This is why parents have children, right? But when you swung that rope against the metal track of the garage door, the bead made it ring like a bell. So the deal was, whenever one of us chose to ring the bell, the fight was over. We'd each run to an opposite corner of the square concrete slab that was our driveway, not unlike a boxing match. And then we'd run toward each other in the middle, but instead of boxing it out, we'd stop, we'd shake hands, apologize, and move on. There was too much fun to be had, too much life to be lived for us to go on mad at each other. What I think we both knew instinctively, but didn't have the language to articulate at that age, was that we were committed to each other. That in the end, neither of us was going anywhere. Our friendship was more important than our fight, and we'd rather do less damage and more good. Our commitment kept us going back to the bell in conflict so we could find our way back to each other. We have different kinds of friends throughout life. You have your group friends, your work friends maybe, your shared interest friends, your childhood friends. All these kinds of friends play their part and they can enrich your life. But there's one kind of friend in particular that we all need, the kind that I think is the strongest antidote to that problem of loneliness that we named in the very first week of this series. And that's a committed friend. A friend who's in it with you for the long haul. A friend who won't be scared off by a fight, but will ring the bell to reset the friendship, or run to her corner when you ring the bell first. Proverbs 18:24 names this distinction for us. Humans have known it to be true for a long time. There are persons for companionship, but then there are friends who are more loyal than family. The version I memorized as a kid says, there's a friend who sticks closer than a brother. And I appreciate the modern translation for its more inclusive language, but I also like that image of sticking close, closer than a sibling even, because you choose to, not because you were born to. That choice to be a friend that is closer than family is the picture of commitment. There's one story that rises above the others in our Bible when it comes to talking about this kind of commitment that blurs the lines between family and friendship. And that's the story of Ruth. If you've never read it, you'll find it in the Old Testament of the Bible, and it's only 4 chapters long, so you can read the whole thing on a lunch break or listen to the audio on your commute into work. I'll give some context and summary today, but ultimately Ruth has some lessons for us about what it means to be a committed friend. Her very name is derived from an ancient word meaning friend or companion. So right off the bat, we get a sense of what her character is all about. Ruth is a Moabite, which is different from an Israelite. Most of our stories are about the Israelites, but she's married into an Israelite family that had moved to Moab, her land. She married a son of Naomi, and her sister-in-law Orpah was married to Naomi's other son. So all of them are this family together, but within the first 5 verses of the book, all the husbands die. Naomi's husband and her 2 sons, dead, done, over. So unapologetically inconsequential characters in the story. Nevertheless, the 3 widows remain. And in antiquity, the life of a widow is not one to be envied. They need family. They need a people to which they can be connected. So Naomi prepares to return to her homeland, Israel. She turns to her 2 daughters-in-law, now also detached and unmoored from any sort of security, and tells them to remain in Moab, to go back to their mothers' homes. They'll be better off there. And starting in verse 14 of chapter 1, here are the choices that the 2 younger women make. Then they, these women together, lifted up their voices and wept again. Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth stayed with her. Naomi said, "Look, your sister-in-law is returning to her people and to her gods. Turn back after your sister-in-law." But Ruth replied, "Don't urge me to abandon you, to turn back from following after you. Wherever you go, I will go, and wherever you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Wherever you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord do this to me and more if even death separates me from you." When Naomi saw that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped speaking to her about it. So both of them went along until they arrived at Bethlehem. I would have loved to have been there to hear Ruth's speech. It's like this sweeping anthem with cadence and pattern and symmetry. Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you stay, I will stay. Your people, your God, my God. Like, do people actually just speak like that in the moment? Or had she been preparing this speech because she knew Orpah was going to buzz out? Did she stand up on a rock or like next to a river with the wind blowing in her? I don't know. I feel like she must have. Regardless, her beautiful words have proven timeless. They are uttered even today in weddings, in vows, in promises made between lovers. We use her words now in the sacred moments when families are forged, but she first uttered them when the family fell apart. Her familial obligation to Naomi was over. Nothing bound them together anymore. Ruth was free to go her own way. But she chose Naomi. This time, not first as family, but foremost as friend. She made a commitment to be with her through thick and thin. And what we learn from her epic declaration is that to be a committed friend, you first give up part of yourself. Something about you will have to change. For Ruth, she gave up a lot. She committed to significant changes. She gave up her home, moving to a foreign land with Naomi. She changed her nationality. Your people will be my people, she said. She would be grafted into the Israelite community. And if you read the whole story, you'll find out that she even made it into the bloodline of Jesus. She changed her religious identity. Your God will be my God. Fully understanding that her polytheistic worldview would not align with a people who worshiped one God alone. Ruth gave up a part of herself to make her commitment to Naomi. And for us to be committed friends, we might consider how we do the same. To be clear, I'm not saying that we should lose ourselves in our friendships. I'm saying we just don't come first all the time. In commitment, we practice putting someone else first. So think about some of your closest friendships. Have you given up any part of yourself for those friends? Are they your friends primarily because they provide some benefit to you? Are you there for your friend first, or are they there for you first, and that's why you keep them around? In a healthy friendship, of course, both friends give a little, so no one loses. The more one gives up for a friend when it's mutual, the more one is filled up by what the friend has given too. So you may not give up your home or your nationality or your religion for a friend to whom you are committed, but what would you give? Would you let go of a divisive opinion or an overly hectic schedule? Would you give up a job opportunity to stay close to a friend? What would you give up? In the Gospel of John, Jesus makes a strong statement about friends. He says in John 15, verse 13, "No one has greater love than to give up one's life for one's friends." He says this, of course, knowing that he is going to do just that. He's going to die for his friends, for the world, and so we hear it primarily in terms of death. Sacrificing one's physical life for another is the greatest act of love. But there's also a daily sense to it as well. In a true lifelong friendship, there is a daily giving up of one's own life. What I want, what I need, what I think, what's important to me, laying that down for the sake of a friend, putting their life ahead of your own. Commitment in friendship demonstrates that we don't always put ourselves first, but that our friends hold a place of honor in our lives such that we make changes for them. We give up pieces of our lives for them. Picking up Ruth's story again a little bit later, she and Naomi make it to Bethlehem, back in Israel where Naomi is from originally. Girls gotta eat, so Ruth decides to go out and get food for the both of them. And a common practice in the day for the poor and the widows was to glean. They'd follow along behind a harvester in someone's field and collect the grain that was dropped along the way. Harvesters were even instructed not to collect everything in the field so that there would be enough left over for those who had nothing. A practice we would do well to observe in our modern capitalist consumer culture as well. But that's me starting to preach another sermon. Ruth goes out to glean in a particular field belonging to a man by the name of Boaz. As an aside, Boaz is dreamy. It does not say that in the Bible, but he's the love interest in the story, and also his name is Boaz, so he has to be. But anyhow, Boaz shows up, and this happens. Just then, Boaz arrived from Bethlehem. He said to the harvesters, "May the Lord be with you." And they said to him, "May the Lord bless you." Boaz said to his young man, the one who was overseeing the harvesters, "To whom does this young woman belong?" The young man who was overseeing the harvesters answered, "She's a young Moabite woman, the one who returned with Naomi from the territory of Moab." He explains then to Boaz that she's been gleaning in the field all day. Boaz approaches her and tells her to be sure not to go glean in any other field, but only to stay in his field. And she can go get a drink of water from his clay jugs anytime she needs to, so that's generous. Then Ruth replies to Boaz, How is it that I've found favor in your eyes that you notice me? I'm an immigrant. Boaz responded to her, everything that you did for your mother-in-law after your husband's death has been reported fully to me. How you left behind your father, your mother, and the land of your birth and came to a people you hadn't known beforehand. May the Lord reward you for your deed. May you receive a rich reward from the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you've come to seek refuge. What we see here as Boaz enters the scene is that Ruth's commitment to Naomi is something that catches other people's attention. Commitment catches other people's attention. Her choice to stick close to Naomi was so far above and beyond what outsiders expected of her that they stopped and took note. A commitment like that was apparently unusual in Ruth's time. It seems practically unheard of today. Commitment of most kinds is in short supply these days. We are sometimes quick to end a friendship or just let it fizzle when we think it's run its course, or when we enter into conflict that we can't resolve, or when we just get bored. So when we see the opposite, when we encounter a deep commitment in a friendship, we notice it. What are the things we take note of? What makes us say of someone else, wow, they're really lucky to have you as a friend, or you're a really good friend to him? I know I've said things like that before to people when I see that someone is truly a blessing in their friend's life, when they're going beyond the usual expectation of friendship and demonstrating a commitment that's more like family. Are we friends like that? Not with everyone, of course, we can't be, but with anyone? Do we care for the physical and emotional well-being of a friend like Ruth did for Naomi? Do we stick close to them when they've lost virtually everything they've had? Do we step out with them in faith into the road ahead that's unknown? Do we work together with them to try and figure out what's next in life? Do we stay the course, nurturing the friendship, not for years, but for decades? Commitment in friendship is not the norm. It didn't seem to be in Ruth's time, and it isn't for us today. When we practice it, when we give it, and when we receive it, that catches other people's attention, and it can inspire them to a deeper friendship too. We don't get to follow Ruth or Naomi to the end of their lives. The book ends long before that. But we do learn one more thing about commitment from Ruth toward the end of the last chapter. I'm basically skipping over the entire love story between Ruth and dreamy Boaz, but that's actually kind of my point. Through a long, drawn-out, suspenseful, and at times scandalous sequence of events, Ruth and Boaz finally get together. I'll let you go read that part for yourself. But here is the detailed conclusion at the end of chapter 4. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. He was intimate with her, the Lord let her become pregnant, and she gave birth to a son. The women said to Naomi, not Ruth, to Naomi, "May the Lord be blessed, who today hasn't left you without a redeemer. May his name be proclaimed in Israel. He will restore your life and sustain you in your old age. Your daughter-in-law, who loves you, has given birth to him. She's better for you than 7 sons." Naomi took the child and held him to her breast, and she became his guardian. So what's the point of all that? What does this baby have to do with commitment and friendship? The point is that the book ends with Naomi holding Ruth's baby on her lap. Naomi is still there. She didn't have to be. Ruth had no blood connection to Naomi. She could have married Boaz and dropped Naomi like a hot rock, but of course she didn't. Ruth's commitment to Naomi meant that her marriage secured Naomi's future too. Naomi was always going to be a part of Ruth's life. Commitment means that the friend isn't replaced when someone else comes along. But who among us doesn't know what that's like? We've all lived through what happens when a friend starts dating someone new. Do we ever see that friend anymore? No. Sometimes that's humorous, and eventually they figure out that they still need you, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's quite hurtful to have your friendship replaced when someone else comes along. I do a lot of weddings, and I can't tell you how many times I hear a maid of honor or a best man give a toast to the new spouse of their apparently former best friend and say something like, "Well, now I turn over my best friend duties to you. Take good care of her." And I have to refrain from standing up and yelling like, "No, you don't have to do that. You can still have both. In fact, you should have both." Your spouse doesn't have to be your best friend. If they are, that's great, that's fine, but you can have more. When we are committed to a friend, there is space for them in our lives, no matter who or what else is going on. There's much more that can be said about commitment and how it deepens the relationships we're in, but the story of Ruth shows us that commitment requires that we give up a little bit of ourselves for someone else. True commitment between friends draws attention from others, and a committed friendship means that no one gets replaced when someone else comes along. As we end this series, I think of all the people that I've talked to about it in the last 5 weeks. So many people have completely identified with what we said in week 1, that people are lonely. We have fewer friends than the generations before us, and making and keeping friends as adults is hard. At the end of the day, friendships take work. They take commitment. If you find yourself in this phase of life without that friend described in the proverb, the friend who is more loyal than family, perhaps you need to become that friend first. Who is someone with whom you need to strengthen your commitment? It can't be everyone. You have to start with one. So who might it be? As I think back over these weeks, they actually form a decent list of criteria. Who is someone with whom you've at least spent a respectable amount of time? Are they someone that you've been vulnerable with? Or could you be? Have you weathered any conflict together yet? Or do you imagine that you could? Start there and then make a commitment. Maybe even tell them about it. Name that you want to build a more intentional friendship together, and then begin that steady and beautiful and lifelong work together. Because none of us are meant to do this alone. Will you pray with me? God of Ruth and Naomi, you are a giver of friends who stick closer than family. In our loneliness, give us the courage and persistence of Ruth to give up part of our lives for our friends and to stay with them through thick and thin. May we trust that in time, our lives will be filled over and again with the love that can only come from a friend. In the name of Jesus Christ, who gave up his own life for us. Amen.